Network Entertainment.
And welcome to my podcast, the RJ Ledesma Podcast. In my podcast, I like to speak to entrepreneurs and business owners to learn more about how they think about doing business, what are their success secrets, and can we replicate them for our own businesses. And today, I am very, very happy to have on the podcast, she is a Filipina-Dutch American entrepreneur who has put up an app that is helping our OFWs in the US initially and hopefully all over the world. Please welcome to my show, Rebecca Kersch. She is the CEO and founder of TANGGapp. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, RJ. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Really great to have you over here. Two of our good friends, also her investors, are Andre Yap of Ignite and Franco Verona of Foxmont. They were also very happy to connect us all together because you've got a really interesting app that you've put up. In a nutshell, or in an elevator pitch, how would you describe to people exactly what TANGGapp is all about?
Yes, so TANGGapp, we talk about it, that it's the international peer-to-peer mobile payment app. So what that means is you can download the app in the US, you can download it in the Philippines, and then you can send money from the US to the Philippines. But the vision really is, right, because, okay, we all know payment apps, but for us, what we really focus on is that sending money should be as easy as texting, regardless of where you live, what you earn, or how much you want to send. So what sets us apart a bit is that you can send what we call micro remittances with us. So you can send small amounts as little as $5. And the other thing is the peer-to-peer element. So the fact that both the sender and the receiver download the app, for most remittance companies today, only the sender has a relationship with the company. So that's where we distinguish ourselves a bit. And having both downloaded the app, that allows us to also add on other products, add on other features. But another point I really want to focus on that I think makes it built by Filipinos for Filipinos is that we're really focused on making transactions not just transactional, but relational. And I can explain more about that, but that's the idea.
Yeah, let's keep that as we go through this discussion. It's very interesting. And initially, the sort of pain point that I see is that you're eliminating a lot of the friction costs of actually being able to send money from the States to here, where you have to go to a shop or somewhere else just to put the money there. And here on this part over here is that you've got to actually go also to the remittance shop just to withdraw the money on a specific day, which is also a lot of eliminating a lot of friction for them.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, what people might not realize, of course, Rebecca is she's half Filipino and she's half Dutch at the same time. Is that, let's say that you were to explain this app to your Lola, and how would you, I guess, simplify what this app means to the common Filipino?
Yes. So unfortunately, my Lola is no longer with us, but I imagine she would be using smartphone. She was brilliant. So the way I would explain it is really that, it's the future of how we're sending money. So I think that countries like the Philippines, right, emerging markets, growing markets, I think they're the future of the world economy. I really believe that. And so how we spend money in our daily lives, this is just a simpler way of it. So the way I would explain it to my Lola, or even, to children or to that next generation, is that on your smartphone, when you want to send money, instead of having to physically go somewhere, that takes a lot of time, right? Those companies also tend to take a lot of money when it's cash-based, is you can use TANGGapp instead. It's very easy. You make an account. It's completely safe and secure. Your money and data are very safe with us. And that way, the money arrives with your relative in the Philippines very quickly, instantly, so within minutes. And why it matters that it's instant, that it can be small amounts, as opposed to, right, the generations above us, I think they were used to sending money once a month, like $1,000. So if we take a bit of a step back, right, so Western Union is over 120 years old. And when you moved abroad, so when Filipinos moved abroad, let's say even 30, 40 years ago, you would move abroad, you would maybe call home once because if you could afford it, if you had a way, right, to call internationally. Right. And so it made sense that was your connection to your loved ones back home. So sending $500, $1,000 once a month when you got paid, that made sense. And you had your catch up and you would find out if that amount still works. And today, right, we have Fiber, Facebook Messenger, like FaceTime, we can WhatsApp, we're so connected. So even when you're far away, you know when something happens to your family within minutes. We're much more connected to each other's lives, but payments hasn't matched that.
I see.
So what's possible with TANGGapp is that, we hear stories from our customers that when one customer last week actually said that her nephew in the Philippines had an injury and her sister wasn't sure if she should go to the hospital, but also obviously worried about the costs, and she could TANGGapp like $50 straight away. So it arrived instant and said, just don't risk it. Just go to the emergency, to go to urgent care. That should be enough for like the first bill, the grab car, etc. And then let me know, call me and let me know. And fortunately, everything was okay. But that matches this world so much better. So the way I would always explain it, and also to kids, is that we're really trying to connect Filipinos abroad back home with their loved ones on a daily basis. And so being able to send smaller amounts and that it doesn't cost you a lot, because that's the problem today, that's a big part of it. And that it arrives instant, that's really important. But it's also safe, secure, and convenient. So really changing how internationally, right, on a daily basis, right? If I see you, I can give you money. I can send you money via an app. But internationally, it should be no different. And that's where we're really trying to sort of upgrade finance and payments to match the world we live in.
It's sort of like remittance is catching up with technology.
Exactly. And I think that when you look at the world globally, when the world moved from home landline phones to mobile phones, countries like the Philippines went straight to mobile phones, right? It's not like everybody got a home landline phone before they got a mobile phone here. No, they just went straight to mobile phones. And we see the same opportunity with finance and fintech and banking. So instead of everybody here, because half of Filipino adults are unbanked or underbanked, instead of them needing a bank account, right, going to a physical branch, opening a checking account one day, I think they can move directly to payments and apps like TANGGapp. And so that's the world we're building for, where it's not just about sending them cash and then there's a cycle of them living cash remittance to cash remittance. They aren't in the financial system like you and I are fortunate to be, because we've always had bank accounts, we've always, had cards and been able to live that way. So that's where we're trying to not just match where the world is, but make sure we're building the next generation digital payments app.
I'm really interested to find out more how you actually built the app from scratch, being the founder. And before I get into that one, what I also find interesting is that as a Filipina, as somebody of Filipino heritage, usually if you grew up abroad and you studied abroad, many people sometimes don't see the Philippines as a land of opportunity. And of late, I've noticed that there have been many foreign businessmen who have actually turned and said, people don't see look at the opportunity here in the Philippines, which many Filipinos don't realize, because sometimes we've been, I guess, oriented to think abroad for greener pastures. How did this opportunity come to you? I mean, why do you see the Philippines as an opportunity as a whole? How does it occur to you as an opportunity when you've had a chance to see how it's like in the economies in the Netherlands, in Europe, in the States?
So it really actually started with, I think to backtrack a little bit, right? So I was born and raised in the Netherlands. My father is indeed Dutch Indonesian. My mother is Filipina and American, and grew up in the Netherlands. We did go to the Philippines every year. It's very much home. I speak Tagalog. I understand it, but I won't torture you with my Tagalog. I'll spare you that, RJ. But we went home all the time. So it really also very much is home. Then I did high school in the US, studied in the Netherlands for university and 2 masters, and then worked in the Netherlands, but then went back to the US for graduate school at Harvard. And so indeed, I've been lucky enough to see all these cultures and places, but what always stuck when I went to study at Harvard is where I started to think about, because I'd worked in consulting, I'd worked for a nonprofit and the United Nations, and I always wanted to work in impact. I always felt this feeling that I really want to help people, but I was also really intrigued by business. And so I kind of did this dance between studying business at school always, and then working at a nonprofit or an impact. And that never turned out what I thought impact work would be. So when I went to Harvard, it was sort of a reset and a refresh on, okay, what do I really want to work on? And I started with stop thinking about the company you want to work for, right? I think also as Asians, we like big, shiny brands. So going for big brand names, and I went into consulting, and that was a very prestigious job. And so I started saying, okay, what is a problem that I really care to fix so that I get up every day and I will be thrilled to fix it and solve it. And what I kept thinking about was my tita baby. I think every Filipino family has a tita baby, and I've shared this story before.
Exactly,
so it's easy to say,
in
who doesn't have a tita baby? Well, mine was extraordinary and very sweet and helped raise me and my siblings. And she lived abroad, right? So she was sending home almost everything she earned, and she was paying exorbitant fees, like over 8 to 10% at times. And 8% is like 1/12. So that meant in a year living abroad, she's working 1 month just to cover the fees for remittances. Not even the month, right? Just the fees. And so I knew that was exorbitant. And so I thought that I've always wanted to help her because she sent everything to her loved ones, right? Lived very meagerly herself abroad, was so generous and loving and sacrificed a lot. So when I was at Harvard, I decided I want to understand more about that because I think, okay, that's horrible that the fees are so high, but it serves a purpose, right? Like her loved ones have gotten this. So I flew to the Philippines in the summer. I got Harvard to pay for it. I think I think I still owe them a research paper. Anyway, I got my diploma and I have a company now, so maybe it's okay. So I flew there, and then I was really naive, and I was kind of shocked actually how little it had helped. Like it had helped as in it had sustained her loved ones, but no one had a bank account. So no one had savings accounts. No one was earning interest. There weren't really many investments, a little bit of land. And that was a bit devastating because I knew what she was doing and sending money for decades. And so I realized that I felt it was a bigger crisis than people understood, where all of these migrant workers are sending so much home. It costs them so much, which is very unfair. And then the receivers are just living cash remittance to cash remittance, and then nothing changes, right? And then at retirement, someone moves home.
And
then what happens is in the family, right? Another niece or nephew moves abroad, and then they take over, that's exactly it's a cycle, and nothing changes. So that's when I decided, okay, this is a problem I want to fix. And when I looked at it, I thought, okay, there's remittance companies, there's on the ground, nonprofits or NGOs that are trying to help financial literacy or like help people understand, what you should be, how to handle money. But nothing was sort of combining and solving the problem all the way from Filipino abroad to daily spending in the Philippines from the receiver. So that's when I decided to start TANGGapp, and that's really where I started to see that my understanding of living abroad, but also at home, actually brought a unique perspective because everyone's either building for just the Filipino abroad or products just for the Filipino at home. And I think that there's something quite tricky to be able to understand and build for both. And that's where, but I'll be really honest, RJ, I actually have no business being here. I have an epic team. So I say all these nice things, but they were the ones to be able to put that together. But that's where it really started from.
Very interesting. So the idea came to you, right? Let's say, and what often happens that you've got a great idea to solve a problem, but your initial idea doesn't become your final idea, right? Yeah. What was the initial idea for TANGGapp, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so the initial idea was still along the lines of some kind of payments app. I think I was still focused more on locally, thinking, okay, if we help the receivers do payments digitally. But every time I started to look into that on like, oh, is it something about financial literacy? Is it about education? Is there a platform I should build in that? So I wouldn't say it was like one set idea. It was more I wanted to solve this problem, and there were different thoughts I had. It always just came back to everyone's income is through remittances. Right? I mean, over 40 billion now goes into the Philippines every day, US dollars. It's 10% of the country's GDP, right? So it's an exorbitant amount. And that's where it just kept coming back to. So I think it's not so much that I had like one idea and I started building for it. It's the kind of, as I went through like different thoughts, different quick experiments, I landed on on TANGGapp actually as it is today quite quickly.
Okay, this is where I want to go into so people can get to learn a bit more. You went through several experiments. I would,
Yeah.
you could call them experiments or pilots or failures, right? So can you explain to me that sort of like that process that you sort of went through until you finally got to, here's TANGGapp.
So it was mostly that summer when I was here that I would speak to anyone and everyone, right? So I would always say, and at TANGGapp, I always tell people that the Filipino customer is our boss, and we just build what they want, right? So it's a very what's called user-driven product, and we always want feedback. We always want to hear, what do you not love about our product and feature? So it actually started in the early days when I came here in the summer, and it was it's summer of 2019 where I started to do this research on the ground, and I would literally sometimes sit outside a sari shop and just see what people were doing, right? Buying a soap bar, right, for 40 pesos, buying like little things like I saw one customer come back 10 times that day to buy a singular cigarette every time. And so really starting to understand that, what are they doing, right? So at first, and I would go when people were open to it, interview them and ask them a lot of questions, and why they don't have a bank account, why they aren't using financial products. So I think that when I first started in my head with, okay, I think it's a financial education platform. When I started asking these questions, it wasn't that people don't understand finance, right? And that was sort of very naive from me. I mean, everybody gets money, right? Like you can overcomplicate it. Like, okay, they might not be able to explain to me how the stock market works, but honestly, I couldn't explain that to you either, RJ. So that's not the problem, right? And it was when you asked them, why don't you have a bank account? It was, I don't know why I need it. And that was quite enlightening. And actually, I think the central bank, the BSP, did a survey that showed the number one reason is people don't know why they need it. And I get it, because everybody is paying cash, right? And it's getting better in Manila. It's really exciting how fast that's improved. But if you go 2 hours north, right, where my family's from, and even Bulacan, Pulilan, like it's back to cash, and half the payment point of sales machines don't work. There's like no connectivity. I'd say like some have glitches and don't work, but there's also a big part where some merchants just don't want it, and they'll say, oh, it doesn't work, and they just want cash because everything they're paying for is still cash. So I think it started with that idea. And then what I will say is the most important thing, if you are going through this process or you're considering it, is like really listen, right? And not just listen and take notes and think, okay, yeah, so I have to add this to my financial platform. No, like, are you hearing what they're saying? And that for me was a bit of a light bulb moment where here I am, coming in with my preconceived thoughts and degrees and thinking like, oh, I need to come in and create some kind of platform to help them save, to help them build a future for themselves and their relative abroad. And then you realize like, no, people get money. It's not that complicated. But the country is now stuck in a system where there's no need for a bank account. I mean, I've used cash their whole life. Everyone here uses cash. Why would I do it any different? And so that's where I started to think like, okay, but what if there's just a simpler way for them not to use cash, and start there. And so, and then do the same thing and start thinking about, so then I sort of already after, I think a couple of weeks started asking different questions, right? Like if there were an app, would you use it? And what started to come out there was then, if let's say your relative abroad sends you money in it, would you consider using it here if it had other features? And they said, and then they would say yes. And I was like, well, why? You had, not to counter what they're saying, but I was just surprised because they always said, I don't see the reason for a bank account. And they said, because if my relative abroad sends it, I trust them and I need the money. So if they tell me, download an app, I will no longer send you cash, then they'll believe it, right? Because there's this sort of aura of your relative abroad. They do really well. They're very successful. They earn a lot of money, right? I trust their advice and they want to help me, right? So there's that automatic credibility that was a really interesting element that I think a lot of people also overlook in wanting to help local Filipinos. That there's already a relationship where you don't have to educate people. You don't have to, you can. Everything is here. I think just tapping into the resources of how extraordinary Filipinos are, that's really the core where TANGGapp focuses.
And so you had that, you finally formulated the idea of, okay, this is where I want to take TANGGapp.
Yeah.
what I find interesting now is that, okay, I know what I want to do, but what do I do next?
Yes.
Meaning, like, how did I set up the actual team for, because your
Yeah.
background basically, I started from Harvard in consulting, is that you know what to tell people.
Yes.
But now this time you
Yes.
have to implement.
Yes.
How did you build a
Yeah.
team, and particularly
Yeah.
how did you build this
Yeah.
the software?
Yeah.
to create the app?
No, it's a really good point. I always joke with my husband that, if we ever landed on an, uninhabited island, I have no skills. Like I've studied business, management, blah, blah, blah. Like that is utterly useless. I don't have a finance background. I don't have a technology background. And here I am. Somehow this path led me to be a fintech founder. And so, I came back to the US after that summer. I was so excited. And I said, I'm going to give it a try. I have another year at Harvard. I'll spend this whole year seeing if I can get to the phase where I can figure out how to build it and maybe get some funding. So I applied to sort of any and all accelerators, incubators, like any program on entrepreneurship, dozens, and I was rejected from all of them. And that was a hard hit, that was like the first cold shower into entrepreneurship, where you have to understand that it takes 9 no's to get 1 yes. And so I really had to reframe, instead of every rejection being this like deep, profound failure that, I Asian kid, right? I secretly want my parents to say I'm doing well, even though I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. So I really, that would hit me really hard. And I realized, you know what? It's different. Another no is progress. That's another no closer to a yes, right? So I just got to get through 9 no's and I'll get to that 10th yes. And it really started to work out that way. So I sort of took the learnings. I always asked for feedback. I would talk to anyone that would hear my story. I think my classmates were so tired of me talking about talking about this. And so then I got the first vote of confidence. I was accepted into a program at Harvard called the Social Innovation and Change Initiative, SICE, and they gave a grant of $30,000 for any social entrepreneur. And then they had a program where once a week they in an evening, there's like a lecture, there's a guest speaker, or basically to help you work on your venture next to school. So I got into that, and that was really the start of, okay, I think I can do this. I think I'm onto this. And then recruited my first team member, our head of engineering, KR. He's still with us, and started from there. And then by the end of my year, I'd won the Harvard President's Innovation Challenge, social impact fellowship fund, like a bunch of grants from Harvard. So basically, I won the value of my tuition back in grants.
Wow. And just after 9 rejections.
Yeah, after dozens, RJ does. Like I think I don't keep the number because it's so depressing. Like how many times. But so then it really started to. I also really took the feedback and changed my pitch, changed my slides, understood. And when people said, okay, but this sounds nice, but it's really hard to build. It's really hard to do this, like the regulations, the compliance, right? So then I just would always say, okay, what would it take for you to believe this? And it's like, well, an interesting partner or so, and so I would look for partners, or like, is there a Filipino organization that might want to work with us, because we all have the same mission. We want to help Filipinos abroad. We want to help the Philippines, right, grow. And so I improved. And then when I got that, then I incorporated right around graduation and said, okay, I'm going to give it a real shot. And then it went from there. And then, actually our first, one of our first investors later on from the Philippines was Katrina Razon. So with her VCK as our venture. So, and went on from there. And now I'm lucky to have partners like Franco and Andre and also US VCs. So it's
really interesting. And, the thing that I'm picking up is really, you have to change the mindset from failure to reframing. And that every iteration was saying, okay, I'm just learning something new to build the...
you have to be ready to just eat dirt. Like, you ignore your ego. Like, it's just going to take so many hits. And just focus on the problem. And I think that somewhere in my gut, on that point, I was always right. At least that's how I work personally. I don't know. And not everyone is like that. But I knew that if I had a problem that I just really needed to fix, I'm also very competitive and I'm my hardest critic, that would get me through anything. And I think that's what to this day has still motivated me. It's my Tita baby and it's her relatives. And I think it's grown into now putting the Philippines on the map and showing everyone for the potential it has to be. Because exactly as you say, right? I think that it's something, it's very undervalued. It's very underestimated. Filipinos are so resourceful, so generous, very kind. And I think that, to have that as a baseline as a company culture makes it very rich. And I think that in the form of tech or startups or products, like, can be, expanded to the entire world. So,
what's up, Kingdom fam? Yuki and Ingrid here from the Kingdom Podcast. Are you someone who has fully integrated K-pop into your life? Or keep up with the latest K-pop comebacks, news, and scandals?
Do you also dream about getting married to your bias and having their babies in the future? Well, you're in the right... What? I'm just being honest.
Look, you know what? Let's just get back to it. At the Kingdom Podcast, we dive into the latest comebacks, dissect the music videos, and do deep dives on controversies.
Not only do we make things informative, but we also keep it fun. It'll be just like listening to a group of friends who love K-pop as much as you.
You won't find another podcast that's as fun and unfiltered as ours.
So, if you're ready for some K-pop chaos, grab your nightsticks and tune in.
Check out the Kingdom Podcast.
Stream it on all your favorite podcast platforms. Stay awesome, Kingdom fam! I thought that was pretty good. What do you think?
Marrying your bias and having their babies? Really?
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm going back to the story of Tita Baby because it seems that it's a very powerful story that you had to tell, which became part of your pitch deck or your presentation. To my mind, that's how it has to work, because sometimes you have to wrap around, for them to pick it up, there has to be a powerful story that sort of concretizes the facts with them. And you talked a lot of what we call venture capitalists. For those who might not, not everybody here is an entrepreneur or startup going for venture capitalists, but these are sort of the people who lend money. The most risky capital lent is venture capitalist money to people like yourselves putting up a company. But do you mind also, there are people who are startups listening over here, and there are also people putting up their own companies, and they're approaching people like Foxmont. They're approaching people like the Vanilla Angels Investors Network, which you've gone to, like Ignite. What have you learned over those years of pitching to them and and happy to grow the company? What do you want to share also that you've gained from all these pitches?
I think the most important thing that I learned is understand who your audience is, right? So you are so in it, like your day to day, you're obsessed with this problem, right? You are like eating, drinking, sleeping, dreaming about your startup, the problems you have. Startups is just 1,000 problems a day that you get. You every morning you wake up, you try and solve as many as you can, and then the next day you continue, and you'll never get to all the problems you want to get to, right? So that occupies you so much, which makes it very hard to sort of zoom out and understand who's sitting across from me as an investor, what are they looking for and what do they want, right? And so I think, for instance, on the US side, right, the startup world and the venture capital investment world is very big. And so these funds, they're not looking for a 2 to 3x return, right? So they're not necessarily looking for your company to just double next year in size, and that's great, we'll be happy. They're looking for 100x return. So also understanding, like, is your business a business that can grow that big? Can it become a 500 million, a billion, a $10 billion company? Because that's what those investors want. In the Philippines, there might be investors who look for different things. They might, they might be in a different or have a different ethos that they sell to their investors, right? Because even venture capital funds have investors. They're called LPs. And so understanding what is it they're really looking for. And I think what was funny is that, I've spoken to over hundreds of investors, a lot of rejections, right? Again, apply the rejection path again, but and get used to that and just grow and learn from it. But the other thing is also, once I also started to ask, like, tell me where your fund is. Like, is this your second, third fund? How much have you deployed? Because there's also, for instance, a difference between, this is my second fund. My second fund has $20 million US. I've already deployed 18 million. That means the last check they're writing is going to be, like, they're going to be very picky because it's the last one in their fund before they raise the next fund, right? So that means, like, they're going to be very diligent. If, let's say, their fund says, okay, we focus on fintech, but not in Asia, only in Africa and the US. Like, maybe if you were the first check in their fund, they would have considered you, right? And they would have said, okay, tell us more, because everything else matches. Just that Asia thing, I mean, we were thinking about entering Asia. The next fund, maybe we'll do one check this fund, right? If you're the last one, there's no freaking way they are. Do you know what I mean? So I think, but you'll, if you don't understand that, you'll spend too much time trying to convince them like, oh my gosh, it's such a good fit. I love this investor. They do fintech. They focus on other emerging markets. The Philippines is a natural complement, right? And you can drive yourself nuts and you can spend sort of a month going back and forth. And then because they are interested and they want to keep in touch, they'll keep asking you a question. So you'll take it as, okay. If I provide this extra slide, right? But really what's happening is it's just not going to happen and you've wasted too much time, right? So I think really understanding in what is this investor looking for, right? What levels of revenue, what stage, what market, what sector do they care? And arming yourself as best as you can to see, okay, these are the investors I should talk to. I think this is a really good fit. Then the second thing is, get used to rejection. Like even if you think it's a perfect fit, it still might not happen for 100,000 reasons. So, and then the third thing is it's a definitely also balancing and trusting your gut and intuition. And if you can, right, like make sure you pick partners you trust and you like. And I am so fortunate. I've always gotten to pick the partners and I've walked away from the ones that I didn't feel we would connect well. I don't think we'd help each other in the right way. And so, but yeah, people like, Franco and Andre and Katrina. And then another amazing VC we have is 1013. They're based in Australia. That team has been phenomenal. I mean, it's really lucky. I think one of my friends at Harvard, Daniel, call him Danji, he'll kill me for saying this. He was one of my first angel checks. He started his own VC called Visible Hands and they invested. And that's, right, those are getting to work with friends or people who have become my friends. That's a blessing. I'm very lucky.
Very lucky indeed. And having said that, so you got the people that you need.
Yes.
You have the funding, a bit of a runway to get things going. The next question, which I had in mind, was really understanding sort of like the secret sauce that you guys have. Meaning, for those who need a better appreciation, sort of what is sort of proprietary to you or something that gives you a better lead time versus other competitors coming into the same space? Because to my mind, first of all, you're coming against traditional players who've been there.
Yeah.
The remittance companies and other companies like of similar nature. Then you also have things like you have the local e-wallets.
Yeah.
And if I open up, to my mind, as I was contemplating, I can open up an app for the e-wallet in the States.
And other countries, yeah.
And then you can open the e-wallet over here.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that you're doing. So help me understand better just what is the secret sauce for you guys.
Is this where you take the founder's IP, RJ?
Yeah.
Start your next business. No, I'm joking. So basically, if I break down the payments world into two categories, you have either in one section, you have global remittances, right? So the companies you mentioned. So you have the traditional Western Unions, MoneyGram, but you also have the digital players like iRemit, Remitly, right? And they're sort of like the better digital versions, better rates, et cetera, than the traditional ones. Then on the domestic side in the Philippines, you have the local e-wallets, right? So what we see is both have actually tried to now enter the other space, right? So the local e-wallets have tried adding remittances or payments abroad. The international remittance players have started to look at, is there things we can do locally to try and add to their business model? If you've started a company in a business, it's being in one and then getting very big makes it very hard for you to understand and launch in the other one. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's certainly a challenge, right? TANGGapp from day one was always going to move across both categories. We were always going to offer remittances all the way through to domestic daily payments. And so it starts there. Like that's already a big difference. And the reason I say that is because when we understood, okay, that means we want to offer micro remittances. We want the receiver to download the app, right? That means the way we built it is per transaction, our profit margin is over 90%. Because out the gates, I built an infrastructure where I would make sure that it would be cheap enough for us as a company that if someone sends $50 and not $500 or $5,000, that we still make money. So
even with the micro remittance,
Exactly.
Yes.
So, and what you see is that that's made a big difference, right? So we have like an over 60% repeat use rate, which is really high for the industry. I think especially in the US, if you look at different direct-to-consumer fintechs, the benchmark is like anywhere from 5 to 10%, you're doing pretty good. So us being, what is it, right? Like 6 or more times that is really good. And that's because we've really built an app where it's really easy to use and people love that. On top of that, like understanding the Filipino at home and abroad, right? So I will say there's a lot of technical elements in our feature, in the way we've built the product that are quite proprietary, but set us apart. The second thing is making it relational, not transactional, right? So what I explained about being a part of daily life. So we have what actually most companies don't have, even just a note section. You can add a sticker, you can add a GIF, and those are really fun to read. Like there's anything from like, here's $40 for boba tea, or there's just a note this morning actually that I happened to see that said, for Nanai's merienda, ha 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 ha, and it was like $10. And I would love to hear what the story behind it is, right? And so you really see the difference between, we've really taken what is so logical as sometimes a domestic product, but been able to apply it to the Filipinos abroad. And I think that the third part to it is being able to very quickly move. So being very agile and quick, right? So at this point, all the companies I mentioned, they are very big and they're very successful. And I will say, like, any and all improving financial products for Filipinos is always good, right? Mm-hmm. So I respect them and I applaud them. I think it's so important that we all do what we can, right? But what's interesting is we can move really quickly. I mean, the fact that we were able to get Tang off the ground, build such a complex product, because no one's built it this way, get the receiver to download it, that was very difficult because all behavior is, why? I can just send it to this cash point and they'll pick it up. So why does my ate have to download the app? And and it's the middle of the night there. And so, right, so that's a big sort of friction point. It's a lot of effort. So, but we got all that done. And I think that being able to hear what users say, adapt quickly, build something new, or like improve the feature, that's what I'd say our product and engineering teams are really, really good at. We can move really fast. I mean, I think that in a year, they do something like 20, 30 app updates with like major features, other things. So that all those three things combined, right, I think make us a pretty exciting rocket ship. So, but having said that, we're always happy to partner. So if anyone is interested.
and talk about that one. When I look at what you were doing and you learned everything just along the way, it just occurred to me that you faced a lot of challenges. And was there a point where you said, okay, I can just go back to the Netherlands and just do consulting again and forget about all this because it's just too big of a hassle. And I built this in the midst of COVID, So were there points like that for you?
I think that there were sort of rationally times where it would get really tough, or too many rejections where you're like, when is that yes coming? It's also been a very hard market economically, right? Where there's also been less faith in tech. There's been a lot less faith in direct-to-consumer fintech. So going up against those things. But deep down inside, I always knew that I was going to bring this to a win, not because my personal competitiveness, but because other people relied on it. And I think that's where my Asian heritage and Asian parents, I just don't want to disappoint my parents or my tita baby that's I think what always kind of got me up. So that's where I also say, right, I think a lot of people who want to do entrepreneurship think I'll just find a brilliant idea, and I would say take a step back and really remember what is the problem, and are you obsessed with it? Because if you aren't, the hard days will be you'll quit. And I think that there was another Harvard founder who gave a really good speech and said, don't be the reason your startup dies. Like, almost all startups die by suicide, because there's always a solution. There's always a path. And I know that sounds simple to say, but even when things are really hard or you've run out of money, like, can you just work at it alone for 3 months, right? Get rid of the team and then figure out, there's always something you can do. Like, do you need to pivot? Do you need to, and I'm not saying that there aren't times where you maybe need to give up or walk away, but make sure that you're not the reason, right? Make sure that you're not too burnt out. You're not, or the opposite, partying too much because it's going really well and you're excited, but you're just showing up exhausted every morning. I'm like really old, so I don't, and I have a child, so I don't party anymore, but I can imagine what that's like. So, right, don't be the reason your startup fails, and ask for help.
Share me right now, just what is the current size of the organization? What's been your traction from when you started until what it is right now?
So when we started, it was, we had it like anybody else, an MVP, right? I would beg my cousins and aunts and titas to test it and to download it, and to I would bother them all the time, and they'd, as nice titas and cousins do, is they'd tell you why it's really bad and why they don't want to use it. And so I had to give them all these promo codes. And so, you really started from a few dozen users at the start. And since then, with our monthly volume, it's grown over 30x since launching. And we have over 50,000 users. We've had millions of US dollars go through the app, which is fantastic, especially with, the average amount is a few $100s as opposed to 1,000 or thousands in the original traditional remittance way. And so, we're licensed in the Philippines, work with partners that are licensed in the US. And so it's really taken off. And that's really exciting. I think that's where it's a really nice moment when things click after all your hard work, and it seems like, okay, I think I'm onto something. So yeah.
How many years old is the app?
So we officially incorporated in 2020, but didn't launch the app officially for a couple more years. So I'd say about 3.5 years now.
3.5 years, and you built 50,000 users and millions of dollars have gone through the app.
Yeah.
And since you're here on a regular basis in the Philippines.
Yes.
So you go around literally.
Yes. I'll be back in December.
Oh, great. And as you come back, what type of partners are you looking for to grow here as you build the app?
Yeah. So I think what's always really interesting is when we go to raise our next round, which will be our Series A, where we're actually looking for interesting strategic partners, right? So is there a way we can complement each other? It can be anything from even the commercial chains here, because I think that there's an interesting fintech supplement that could work with, you'll know much more about this than I do, that even the franchises. So for instance, we heard that there's a lot of Filipino OFWs who will group together to buy a franchise location, which is brilliant. And I love hearing that, because it means they're putting their hard-earned money towards their own retirement and passive income, and buying whatever the chain is, right? A location near their home and their family where they'll eventually move back to. So what could be really interesting is partnering with an existing franchise, right? Our franchise company, the holding group, and seeing, okay, if there's a way from the US or the other countries we're launching in for people to pay directly with TANGGapp for whatever their investment is, it can make it so much more simple. And perhaps it opens up a revenue stream for these franchises as well that they never even looked at, or can increase growth. Because usually I think what happens is they come here and then they sort it out locally and they transfer money with their banks, and and so I think that's things like that could be interesting. So partners on that front, or with other commercial players. And then I think also on the payments and banking front, right? Everyone always asks me and says, oh, there's so many competitors and it's such a crowded space. And to me, that's just a proof point that it's an important place to build something, an important sector to focus on. And I don't see them as competitors. I think that there is a world where, one day when Tang is interesting enough, one of them might see the opportunity and partner with us and buy us. So from that perspective is, any financial players like e-wallets or banks, if they're interested in our strategic investor in our Series A, for us, that makes it really interesting, because I think, right, let's not hide in corners and being oh, we don't talk to them because they're a competitor, or right. And I think there's a little bit there historically in the Philippines, because it comes from a lot of hardship and you had to be very careful and guarded of your businesses. But I think the world's evolving. And so let's work together and then give Filipinos the best options. And that's something where I hope to be able to facilitate a little bit of that. My door is always open.
Interesting. And then, like I said, a lot of entrepreneurs listening to the show, and maybe even foreign Filipinos
Yeah.
and people like yourselves of Filipino heritage. I'm very interested to find out what are the opportunities you're seeing from the hat that you wear, from the perspective that you come from, that you see in the Philippines that
Yeah.
are great opportunities, not necessarily that you'd pursue because you're doing so much already, but something you're seeing, oh, this is really great. I wish somebody was working on this one.
Yeah. How much time do you have, RJ? I'm an entrepreneur. I have 10 bad ideas every hour. So I could
We're
go on.
precisely, we're the same right there.
Yeah. It's just, I think it's so exciting. I think one big thing that jumps out is I won't say the obvious one, which is anything on AI. I think that's, a given, but I think femtech in the Philippines has so much potential, right? I think that there's still, I think what's incredible about this country is that I always explain this to people and I say, look, the titas and lolas run the country, right? Like, everyone knows that. And that's amazing. I don't know what I would have done without my titas, my lolas, right? Like everything was always taken care of, right? And you could rely on your dad and your titos to like, drive you anywhere or take, and if you had questions about anything else, like they would, but there was just such a interesting matriarchal power dynamic that I feel like tech and startups like haven't fully matched. There's really, really exciting ones where, there's like health clinics coming out for women's healthcare and there's startups.
Kindred,
exactly.
yeah.
They're, epic. Love what they're doing. But I think like, if there's one of those, like there's space for so many other things that really could help empower women. And I think combining that with a solution somehow for AI would be a no-brainer.
Fantastic. Really great. Yeah. It takes a bit of percolating in the head, but yeah, I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
What anything else you think of?
I think that there's, just personally on Tang, right? I think there's still a lot of possibility on like innovative savings options for OFWs, and that's also partly what we're working on. So won't share everything there, but I think that, right, just sending money home into sort of a black box, and then suddenly 2 weeks later you hear, oh, you need more, right? Like those are easily solved. There's problems. And I think Tang already starts with that at TANGGapp. Sorry. In America, I call us Tang.
It's easier to roll off the tongue,
and the TANGGG is capitalized because it stands for Tap and Go Global. So in the US, you can say, oh, I'll Tang you. And here they say TANGGapp, right?
TANGGapp,
so it's a nice double meaning. But on that front, like being able to send smaller amounts, it's already forcing or allowing people to budget. So instead of sending 1,000, they'll send 100 for their mother's medicine, and then on Monday, and then on Wednesdays they'll send 75 for my niece's school supplies, and then on Friday they'll send $50 for boba tea and a cocktail because like their nephew got an A on their report card, right? And so they're starting to budget actually already, and it's a lot less about like here's $1,000 and no idea, and then only half of it goes to what's needed for different reasons, right? And you can't really fault anyone for that. So I think that's there's still a lot of potential there. I think one other, I think that there's still a lot that can happen on infrastructure. So I do think there's also still a lot of SaaS opportunities. But again, I have so many bad ideas every hour. RJ, and I'm just lucky to work on one that seems to be interesting for folks.
But that's where entrepreneurship begins. Bad or good ideas. It's our value judgment on those ideas which matter.
Exactly.
Now, right now, TANGGapp is basically between the US and the Philippines. And there's a lot of remittances over there. But we realize that, of course, we've got a global diaspora. There's a large European, Middle Eastern. What's your vision in the next 5 to 10 years?
So actually this year we're launching in 2 other countries. So look out for that announcement soon, which is very exciting. Again, still focusing on the Filipinos, just in different places. And we'll always be growing that steadily, right? So next year doing the same. But I think that for me, TANGGapp's vision is like I said, the start of it is sending money should be as easy as texting. But if you look at it more globally, right, I think it has the potential to become sort of the financial neobank for both the unbanked in the Philippines as well as Filipinos abroad, and incorporating whatever they need in that sense. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting because we've had some interesting partner reach outs because having the receiver on the app as well as the sender, it, for instance, creates a credit system. So if you've been receiving, whatever, $150 every week for the past 30 weeks, that's a stable income. That can give you a credit score, even though you've never had a bank account, you've never, right? So we also have a credit score system data that we can do a lot with. And there's financial players that are asking if we want to partner because do we want to offer these people like low income loans or mortgages and they'll offer the product and we can do a revenue split. And that's because we have the data and they have the product. So there's so much still possible going from that. So I think we're in a really exciting phase as we grow and scale now on, okay, what do we want to bet on, right? Because as you know, in a startup, I can't do 20 bets. I have to be specific. And that's where the risk comes in, right? It's like, okay, but if I do 2 bets and 1 fails, like where are we? So it's about still doing cheap experiments all the time, no matter how much money you raise. Don't lose that culture. And then when you think something's working or you can tell based on your metrics, the ROI, like bet on it and go for it. So doing that all day, every day, RJ. When I figured it out, I'll let you know.
Yeah. And finally, I wish we had more time, but as we begin to wrap up this discussion, it's been a really interesting ride for you for the past 5 years in setting this up in the midst of COVID and actually putting it up. And before that, having a consulting career before that. And if you were to pass on just 2 or 3 nuggets of advice that you've gained over the years for somebody running the business, setting up business, all these different things.
Yeah.
And you're going to talk to your younger self saying, these are things I wanted you to know or things I want you to know to put in business. What would that be?
I think the first thing would be is figure out who you are. We all do things from different reasons, right? So I joke about it, but wanting to make sure that I get, the right nice approval or compliments from my parents or family, or right. That was really deep in me. And I had to sort of understand that, why do I want that? Where does that come from? What's my fear? And when I address it, then I won't make decisions from that perspective, right? Because if you're insecure about things, that's okay. But if you can recognize it, then you know, like, oh, I don't know why in that investor meeting I suddenly got so nervous and I said all the strange things. And because everything ties back to who you are, right? So on the note of don't be the reason your startup fails, like figure out who you are and what you need, if you can, and try to learn as much as you can about yourself. And it'll happen more and more as you do the startup. It's not like, oh, you have to, found enlightenment before you start a startup, but always try and make sure you're learning as much as you can about who you are and about what excites you and what drives you. And then when you also find flaws or weaknesses, outsourced. I am horrible at administrative things. I can do it and I do it, but it's not my strength, right? So find a team member who can help you with that. Like, I can't do any of the engineering product stuff. I mean, I can a little bit by now, thankfully, but right, find the right person for that. So I'd say 1, learn who you are. I think the second thing is, and then pick something. Because if you don't pick something, others will pick for you, right? You have a child as well. Like if they seem a little, you'll start to give them suggestions, right? And if it's not you, it's their friends at school, or right. And that happened a bit to me when I went into consulting. Is I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do, and so I convinced myself that when I saw friends going into consulting, and that was a very prestigious job, that I also wanted that, and that it fit me for so many reasons, and it certainly fit me a little bit, but it at the core wasn't what I wanted. So pick something, or others will pick for you. And I think the third thing is like, make sure to have fun. Life is short. If you're not laughing a few times a day, it's you have to be able to keep laughing at stuff, because otherwise it's a dark world, and don't make it darker for yourself, right? So find love and joy and make sure you hold on to it.
Well, I look forward to laughing towards TANGGapp success, both, of course, here in the Philippines and other parts of the world. Again, Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us over here in the podcast. I'm sure so much people have learned from the podcast. Lastly, if they want to collaborate or partner with you, where can they get in touch with you? Yeah,
so I'm on Instagram. Rebecca Kersch is my Instagram handle. Also on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Rebecca Kersch. And yeah, send me a DM or a message if we need to chat.
Yeah, and thanks so much for joining us here on the RJ Ledesma Podcast. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in the next podcast.
The opinions of podcast creators, hosts, and guests are not necessarily reflective of the official stance of the Pod Network Entertainment, its hosts, or other network programs. The content created by the people behind the podcast is personal and not meant to harm any religion, ethnicity, group, organization, company, or individual.